It is the first model of the Ultraman Collab announced at Medarot Day 2021. It is ULT00 Ultracium, with a kit of Shoot FC, Hyperbeam, Rifle, Float Legs, and the leg ability of Holy Grace, which buffs all leg stats, minus the HP and heavy limit, for every positive effect active on self. Now, announcement of the Ultraman Collab was honestly huge news. Honestly, par for the course that they would save the best announcement for last at the end of the Medarot Day 2021 live streams, but it still is a very openly welcome collaboration nonetheless, as Ultraman indeed is a very popular character, referenced quite often in a lot of other series. Medarot in this case will no longer be an exception to that rule. Shoot FC is a unique skill and a brand new skill to the game, as put simply it is full charge plus shoot boost to self, but also applies the negative ailment of melt to self. So upon use, you only get one use essentially at one head use. You begin to also progressively taking increased damage over time, as if you were inflicted with fire or melt status from that said ailment move. So very handy for shoot-based skills in this case, but it does also come with that risk to guarantee that you do want to make sure that if you are going to use it, that you can keep yourself pretty well covered and minimize incoming damage where possible. As over time, that loss to your HP is going to make you much easier to kill and much easier to punish on the moments where you have a lapse in your guard. Hyperbeam, of course, is probably one of the best shooting-based skills in the game, next to Ghost Shot, as it has a ×2 damage bonus at 30% charge, a ×3 bonus at 100% charge, and it deals pierce damage on top of that. The drawback to it, however, is the fact that you also are unable to defend or evade while in your cooldown, as it is a very high-power skill, but it is also optic attribute, which means in the rare case that an opponent may be using optic guard in this in a rare fight, it does mean Hyperbeam will be declared useless unless the guard is not active or the guarded part in question is broken first. Left arm is a basic rifle, so you can never go wrong with it across the board. Very solid base power too at that 1390, nearly 1400 on top of that. Very high success too, also at 1360 roughly. So very high chance to land hits, very high chance to land crits on top of that, and pretty solid heat cool across the board too at the high 600s in both senses of heat and cool. The Hyperbeam naturally does have the higher power at the 1618, but it is also a little bit of a gamble move, as the success is about 804, which really isn't too bad, but the opponent is very likely to be guarding a lot of blows unless the opponent is unable to defend them. Very low heat cool as well on the lower end of the scale, so it is going to take a little bit of time to prep the skill in question, but once the heat and cooldown are finished, let the punishment reign supreme. Across the board, float legs also are very good too, as they're good A rank on all terrains and S on cyber, but also packing some very solid skills across the board too. About 3450 HP for the legs, very high melee resist at nearly 1200, shoot resist at 872, so roughly in that lower end spot. So more able to take resistance from melee-based attacks more than shoot-based ones. Pretty decent evade at 973, closer to 1000, which is roughly the sweet spot you want to be in if you want to have that decent success of dodging or grazing a lot of incoming attacks. But the base speed of 768 means it puts it in that sweet spot of biped legs, but for float legs, that high 700s honestly is really, really good. And on top of that, having the 2 heavy slots also works very nicely in this case. So as a pure set score, I would rate Ultracium a pretty solid 8 out of 10 in this case. He's pretty well rounded for what he offers. The Shoot FC does kind of tie into both his Hyperbeam and his rifle, so it can complement both in this case at the drawback of the melt status to self. The float legs do grant him pretty solid mobility on any terrain in this case, and of course S rank on cyber. The Hyperbeam, of course, is a very openly welcome skill, especially with it being on a right arm, because normally with bots like Beastmaster, Hyperbeam normally, or even Arc Beetle in this case, in another case, it's normally a head or a left arm, which are a little harder to properly time and apply for in a build. But because it is a heavy part, it does kind of tie in the same instance as, say, Omega Knight from the Digimon collab, where you do have to eat that same kind of drawback when using it. So pure set score, I would rate a very solid 8 out of 10. The one drawback I do see is his arms are just a little squishy in this case, with that roughly 2850 for his total HP. So if you can use maybe a power-up chip for HP, if you decide to go for balance, or a power-up chip for power to capitalize on what he has, would probably do him some good. As mixed parts, I would rate him a very solid 9 out of 10 in this case. The Shoot FC is a very open addition essentially to any shoot-based nuker. Even with the melt effect, you probably could remove that pretty easily with Stat Cleanse, but this full charge plus shoot boost is a very handy 1-2 punch, essentially, for anyone that is going to make use of it. The right arm of Hyper Beam also is very solid on any high-end shoot nuker. Basic left arm rifle is good anywhere, so you can never go wrong with it wherever you go, and float legs are very handy. I should also mention in this case that Ultracium also is the first case we have of a male bot having Holy Grace as a leg ability, as currently up to this point it's only Blazermate, a female bot, that has that ability. So also more so in the sense that once shoot boost or even another support skill goes live, Ultracium will be progressively going faster and faster, making him even more of a force to be reckoned with on the field.